My name is Andrew Hamilton and I'm a stand-up comedian. I'm also a convicted drug supplier. I had a pretty average upbringing. I grew up in Sydney's far North Shore in Hornsby. One of 5 kids, grew up in just a pretty average middle-class upbringing. Happy household. My parents sent me to a private school. I went to university. I had everything put in front of me to set me up for a really happy and successful life, and I still found a way to fuck that up somehow. There was a combination of things that led to it. I think one was I started experimenting with drugs pretty much as soon as I finished high school. Or before that, I was smoking weed when I was a teenager, but then from about the age of 18, I was experimenting with ecstasy, and then I went to Thailand with a bunch of mates and I tried magic mushrooms for the first time, and I had such an amazing kind of spiritual experience on mushrooms that felt so positive that when I came home from Thailand, I told my mate how good they were, and he started researching how to grow them, and next thing you know, we were growing them and eating them with mates, and we had so many positive times, both using them, but also all the friends that I was selling them to as kind of just like a side hustle were having such good times on them as well. It made me kind of question our drug laws, because when I was a teenager growing up, like, people would be binge drinking and getting in fights all the time. No one I knew was getting into fights on pingers or on mushrooms. Also, from pretty much age 18, when I was allowed to go into pubs, I was a massive gambling addict on the pokies. And so that was just a constant problem for me all through my teenage years, and then also my 20s. I was gambling so much, and so for me, I was frustrated with the fact that pubs are on every street corner full of alcohol and gambling, and these things were just so evil that it made me kind of question whether our laws make any sense, because alcohol and gambling are legal, but the drugs that I was having a far more positive, less destructive time on are illegal, right? So that helped me to justify my head selling drugs, because I didn't feel like I was any more evil than a guy that owns a pub full of pokies. It started with me just selling mushrooms to friends and friends of friends. And at first, when we first started growing mushrooms, we had these fat, wet, juicy mushrooms. And so I'd be at parties with my friends, trying to eat mushrooms that just tasted like dirt, and they were fat and wet. So we had to eat like half a jar of peanut butter just to get them down. And so I remember saying to my mate, there's got to be an easier way. So we started dehydrating the mushrooms, getting all the moisture out of them, and then putting them into a blender, blending them up into a powder and putting them in capsules. So we started to cap them up, because I realized that way you got past the taste, but then also it helped with dosage, because we could put exactly 1 gram into every mushroom capsule, which helped you to manage the dosage. So that helped me to be able to sell them easily without having to constantly have a scale. But also it helped people to want to buy them, because they could have a mushroom experience without the bad taste. And so, it started for many years. It was just started being friends and friends of friends, and really just being something which helped to cover rent. And then I was working a job, working in public relations as well. So I just had this extra income, which I was constantly blowing on gambling and drinking and other drugs myself. So I was never making any real profit. It was just whatever money I made, I'd always find a way to piss it all away. And that process just got bigger and bigger over time. The whole time I would be working a white-collar job, working in public relations, and I got more and more successful at that, to a point where I was, winning awards and working in some of the world's biggest agencies. But at the same time, I was moonlighting as a mushroom dealer. I'd be standing on York Street in the middle of the city at midday selling 200 mushroom caps, because no cops are looking for a guy doing a drug deal in the middle of the city on a street at broad daylight, right? So, that process just continued and continued over the course of about 15 years, from being just enough to cover rent to being enough for me to be able to eat out and do drugs all the time, to the point where it got to the pointy end, 15 years in, where I was just making absolute mountains of cash. But by that point, I'd broadened out to selling far more than mushrooms, because I'd had guys constantly asking me, what else can you get? And so people, over the 15 years, I'd built up connections, so guys would sell me other stuff. So by the end, I had mushrooms, acid, MDMA, ketamine, and cocaine, right? And I was doing a lot of cocaine myself, but over the course of those years, by the end, I was selling all those in such large amounts that I was just making stupid amounts of money, and still found a way to piss most of it away for quite a long time, before it got to a point when I finally got on top of my gambling and had the cash started to pile up real quick. So I opened a pizza restaurant in King's Cross, but I was still putting around 10 grand of coke up my nose every week. Like, it was just wild, and just spending a lot on going out to restaurants. I thought I was clever. I thought I was never going to get caught because I wasn't driving around in a flashy car. I wasn't trying to be too flashy with the cash. I mean, yeah, I'd go out to restaurants, but that was about it. I thought in my head my game plan was to open 6 or 7 restaurants and then retire. Now, looking back, I think that was a pipe dream. I think the greed would have stopped me from ever really retiring. You don't hear of any guys involved in crime ever really getting out. It's like 1 in a million shot. But, I was proud to at least open a restaurant to do something productive with the money other than pissing it all away up my nose or gambling. So that was at least what I felt was a positive. But, it was still a destructive life. I was unwell, I was fat, I was pasty white. I was doing so much coke that I would usually go 5 days without sleep and then just sleep for 2 days straight. And my heart was beating so fast sometimes that I thought it was just going to stop at any point. There were times when I was so unwell from cocaine and also just being so fat I couldn't even get it up. I was just a piece of shit. I didn't like the bloke that I saw in the mirror at all. And I didn't know how to get out of it. I was stuck in a cycle of my own mess that I didn't have the strength or willpower to get out of myself. And it wasn't until my house got raided by the Raptor squad on the 4th of June 2021 that forced everything to change. A lot of my mates knew about the coke because a lot of the time they would be there doing it with me. I think my family probably knew that I was unwell but didn't know what the reason was. They probably just thought I was partying too hard. But I used to buy coke and it wasn't that big an issue because when you run out, particularly when it's 4 a.m, whatever, it can be hard to get more. But when I was buying ounces and I had it sitting in my house, it was essentially an unlimited supply. And so I would just fucking rip in. And I'd find that by the end, years in, I was just doing just the stupidest, I'd call them rompers or Godzilla lines, just fucking lines like this big and that thick just to fucking feel something, right? It was insane. I'd be doing 1 gram lines just to fucking feel anything. And that would be the way I'd do it for days and days and days, to the point where fucking bits of my nose are falling out. It was just coke falling out of my nose. It was just such a gross, I was just a shell of a man by that stage. And I didn't have a problem with any other drugs being in the house. I never became a mushroom addict by having mushrooms around, but cocaine absolutely had me in its grips. And I found that it was just something I would use on any occasion. If I was down, cocaine. If I was happy, cocaine. And everything in between. Everything needed cocaine. And I got to the point I couldn't have 3 beers. I mean, there's a lot of guys that can't have a few beers now without thinking, oh, fuck, we've got to get a bag. That was what it was like for me. But the problem was that when you feel like doing cocaine, but then you also have an unlimited amount in your house, you're just going to keep going and going and going. And I could keep going because I was making so much money by selling that, but also with all the other drugs that, the only thing that stopped me was just when my body crashing after 5 days. Look, I think there's people that have a functional drug habit, and I think that they know themselves, their own tolerance for it. I think that if you're selling it and you're addicted to it, you're fucked, right? Because you're just going to be in the same situation I was, which is just having an endless amount. And so you find you'd be lucky from that if you're breaking even. You'd have to be selling a lot of coke to cover off the drug habit you got yourself. But look, I think that over the next few years, hopefully, the conversations that we start to have as a society about drug addiction are going to shift to allow people to be more open about it, and we can start to treat drugs as a health issue and not a criminal issue. And hopefully that'll help people to get the help they need when they do have a drug addiction, and not be treated as a criminal or a villain, because it can be a slippery slope for a lot of people to go from using coke just on a night out with friends to then having to do it all the time. And when it starts to impact your health, your relationships and your job, then maybe it's time to really think about your intake and ways to get help. It was a Friday afternoon, 4th of June 2021. I was at home on my own. I'd been doing coke for about 3 days. I was on my own, just hammering in, watching some Guy Ritchie movie, and I heard this loud crack noise in the front door, like crack. And my first thought was that some fat junkie in Surrey Hills had fallen into my front door. And then I just heard, "Police, search warrant!" And I just thought, fuck, I was just, it was like, how did it come to this? It just seemed so surreal. And then the house just started thundering as this battering ram was smashing into the door. And I ran upstairs and started flushing drugs down the toilet. And then I heard them breach the front door and charge up the stairs. And I just ran and hid behind the bedroom door because, I don't know, that just seemed, I was cooked. My brain was fried. That seemed like the best decision at the time. If they can't see, if I can't see them, they can't see me or something, right? So, anyway, they found me heaps quick, and then they tackled me and issued me the search warrant, and I just sat there fucking surrounded by cops, just thinking, I wasn't even thinking, like it was hard to take it all in. Like a few minutes ago, I'd been racking up, smoking ciggies and watching a movie, and now, next thing you know, my whole life's gone to shit. And I had to sit there. It was either sitting there as they tore the house apart, searching for everything, or I could go back to the police station. But I was so coked up, I didn't want to be stuck in a cell at that point. So I just sat there as they went through the house, finding everything, and I just thought, fuck, there we go, another thing. And they found the cash hidden in the house and more drugs, and then I had to stand there in the kitchen as they read through all the evidence, and I just luckily, they were decent enough, the cops, to let me say goodbye to my dogs, which was nice. And I said goodbye to my fiance, who didn't really want to talk to me, and that was it. I just got carted off to Surrey Hills Police Station, and at that point, I was so fucked on coke, it was pretty hard to really take in everything that was going on, to really appreciate the full gravity. I think I was still at that point in a level of delusion that I thought I would get bail the next day. I thought this would be a case I'd get out, that we could figure out next steps. But I think in my head, I was going to get bail the next day and I could be back on the street moving fucking gear the next day, because it was obvious that they got me, but they didn't get the rest of my operation in terms of, where other stuff was stashed and other people I was working with. So I was at least happy about that. But I think I was still in this delusion that I could be back up and active in 24 hours, which was just stupid thinking. So I got held overnight at Surrey Hills Police Station, down in the dungeon there that's got no natural light and no pillows or whatever. And then I fronted court. My lawyer had told me that he thought it was unlikely that I would get bail, but we had to take a shot anyway. But he thought that, I was in local court, I was more likely going to be refused bail and that I had a better chance in the Supreme Court. So we rolled the dice, I lost, and then got put on a prisoner transport truck to go to Park Prison. And, I sat in that truck for a few minutes before another bloke, a Kiwi bloke named Clark, sat in the truck with me, and we chatted, and we were both going to prison for the first time, and so we kind of just chatted and we got on, and I think that made things a bit more bearable, just to have someone who's going through the same experience with you for the first time. You're both figuring it out together, might be able to have each other's back, and got taken to Park and it was just like, it was a cold night, middle of winter, and served like shit cold food. I remember it was like a fish lentil curry, and it tasted putrid, and I was just thinking like, where am I? It just seemed like a foreign world. And then we got escorted to cells in quarantine. And that first 2 weeks in quarantine was the hardest time I did, because you were stuck in your cell for 23 and a half hours a day. I had no TV for the first 2 weeks. I had no books. You're only allowed out of your cell for 30 minutes a day. And so you had very little to distract you, and you're also in prison for the first time. So I was just stuck in my own thoughts. Which was not a place that I really wanted to be. Luckily, because I was coming down from my coke bender, the first few days I just slept. I just tried to sleep as much as possible, because at least sleeping seemed to quiet my mind a little bit. But it was not a great time just to be stuck with just the boredom of it for so long. But I found at least there was compassion among other guys that were locked up. They tried to help you figure out how to use the phones and just figure out the rules of prison, right? Because it's got its own rules, and just trying to figure out things like how to do buy-up, like just how to buy groceries and stuff like that. And so I found that helped my mental state, was just that there seemed to be some level of camaraderie among inmates that at least at face value seemed to be willing to help you. And then, I got moved after 2 weeks in quarantine into a regular prison wing at Park which was 5C, and that was fucking chaos. It was just, you could just feel there was a lot of tension in the air. There wasn't enough phones for 70 guys. Then there was just there was just a lot of very fast instances of violence. Luckily, I was treated fine and made mates with a bunch of guys there that seemed to stick up for me. But, it just didn't, it never felt like, it always felt like something was about to kick off in there. And, that was when, it was during that period that I had a call with my fiance, and she told me that she was leaving me and that she'd rehome my dogs. And, I think that, that kicked the shit out of me a bit, because you're powerless in there. You're at the mercy of people around the outside world, to an extent that I just that feeling of powerlessness just ate away at you. You just felt so confused and angry and sad all at the same time. And if it wasn't for other guys that were locked up with me that helped me through that, I don't know how I would have made it through. That's one thing, is that guys, when you're having a hard time, at least from my experience, will get around you and try and help you to see light at the end of the tunnel, because it was pretty bleak at that point. And at that stage also, I had thought that I was going to get bail. I was going to get Supreme Court bail at any stage, right? And so in your head, I was locked up and I was thinking, oh, I'm only going to be in here for 6 or 8 weeks. That's the process it takes to get bail, to go for Supreme Court bail. Fuck this, I'm not going to be in here long. So my whole life, my whole head was still outside of jail. And it wasn't until about 5-6 weeks in that I found out that my lawyer had pulled out of the case because he was sick and that he hadn't even put in the forms to even apply for bail yet. So I'm like, fuck, I'm going to be in here for a long time. My mindset started to change from I'm just a visitor in here to like, no, actually, this is my new life. I'm just a dude in prison. I've got to stop thinking about my life outside and just accept my life inside. And I think once I started to do that, I think I probably had a better time because I just made peace with it. And so then you start to just, I mean, it sounds weird, but just see the positives in the prison experience. You know, you guys were playing ping pong and you're able to, watch movies at night with your celly, and you're able to play. The guys were playing touch footy competitions and exercise and getting sun and all these things that once you start to embrace that, you're like, okay, my life isn't over. This is just a shitty part of it, but that doesn't mean it's all doom and gloom. There are some positives in each and every day, even just things like having a nice cup of coffee. It seems weird to other people, but I used to get Nescafe Blend 43 on the buy up, and that was like my luxury item. And so just having a nice couple of cups of coffee with my cellmate or with a couple of other fellas, and just feeling like a normal cunt, it just made such a big difference to my mental state that helped me to just want to keep going. So I did 2 months in Parklea, and then I got moved unexpectedly you're not really ever expecting it, to Long Bay Jail, and I did 2 months there. And it's funny, on like the first day in the yard at Long Bay Jail, this bloke came up to me and he's like, mate, I fucking know you. And I didn't want to be mistaken for someone else in there. So I'm like, no, mate, you don't know me. And he's like, I fucking know you, mate. And he's like, you used to gamble on the pokies at the Columbian in Surrey Hills, and whenever you won money, you used to buy me and my missus drinks. And so this guy ended up being like very well connected in the yard at Long Bay Jail. And next thing you know, I had a sandwich press and a kettle and was like vouched for, and like that just made my time at Long Bay just so much better. Everyone was fucking super nice to me. So yeah, who would have thought my gambling addiction would have paid off in some way, just not in the way that I had originally anticipated. So I spent 2 months there, and by that time, I was hanging out with a good group of guys. I was like sunbaking and exercising and bettering myself, and I had accepted that I was at that point that I may never get bail, and to just accept that I'm probably going to be locked up for a few years. And at that point, I'm in maximum security, right, in remand, thinking, at least when I get sentenced, I'll go to minimum security, and that will be an easier time. So at that point, I'd made peace with the fact that I was probably going to be locked up for a few years. And I had a pretty good relationship with my parents at that point. I mean, obviously, it had hit them very hard when I first got locked up, but I think then they even said to me on the phone that they thought me going to prison may be the best thing for me. And so that actually brought us closer. We'd talk on the phone every day about everything. Every day I'd give them like 2 or 3 phone calls. They'd know what was up with me. And so in a weird way, yeah, this worst point of my life ended up, I think, not only making me a better sibling and son and probably person, but yeah, brought the family, or at least my relationship with my parents, much closer. And yeah, it was in mid-October that we went for bail, and at that point there was some kind of error in the lab, I don't know, and they withdrew my biggest charge, which was the mushroom charge. They said that they tested negative for psilocybin, which meant that they basically were duds. So they'd taken that off my charges, and so we used that opportunity to go for bail. And with my most significant charge off at the time, we were lucky and I was granted bail. And so I was allowed to go home to my parents' place. I was under house arrest, essentially, so I wasn't allowed to leave the house unless I was in the company of my mum and dad. And it was weird, like, first. I mean, people might think this sounds silly, but it still took me a little while to get used to just being outside of prison again, even though I was only locked up for 4 months. And I almost missed jail a little bit. There was something about the simplicity of it. I believe still to this day that prison's easy, real life's hard. I know there's a lot of guys that have horror stories, but that didn't happen to me. And I think in there, I mean, your life is simple. Your job is just to survive. You don't have to worry about rent or food or any of these other things that come with real life, all these stresses of real life, that I found it far more relaxing in there than real life. And getting out again and having to work and fucking figure out Centrelink and thinking about like a job and my court case and like just like living with your parents again, all these kind of things, just you think, fuck, like I'm back in this complicated world of real life. And I don't even know at that point if this is going to be permanent or whether I'm going to be sent back to prison. I still was convinced at that point that I was going to go back to prison, that I was going to get sentenced. But I promised myself that while I was out, I was going to try and live a semblance of a normal life. So I started trying to just write a book, just to do something productive with my mind during the day. I was exercising every day. So I wasn't allowed out of the house unless I was in the company of my mum or dad. And so they said to me, Andrew, if you ever want to go anywhere, we can. Just let us know. And so I lined up a Tinder date, and so I even managed to go on a date while I was still on house arrest, which was pretty funny. I'd explained to this girl my situation and that I was like on bail from prison and that I had to bring my parents on the date. And weirdly, that was not a deal breaker. Yeah, she was like, I said to her, you must have gone on some shit dates if you were going to go out with me. And she said, you've got no idea. So we went out, and then she ended up coming over to the house a fair bit, and that just helped me to feel like I wasn't completely a sack of shit, even though I probably was, and that I wasn't completely undesirable, that there was the opportunity in my future to go back to having a normal life. And I didn't need mountains of drug money to have that. You don't need any of that. So it was a few months under house arrest, and then I saw online like an advertisement for a stand-up comedy competition, and I decided to sign up because when I was locked up, I had a chance to think about what I'd always wanted to do with my life and what I would have done if I got a chance to completely have a redo, to restart. And for some reason, the answer was stand-up comedy. I think I'd always wanted to do that, but I was too much of a pussy to try. And so at that point, I was like, well, I've got nothing to lose. I also felt like there was a time when I was locked up where I just thought, what's the most insane thing I could do? Because I thought I could try and go back to a white-collar job and try and play down the news articles or hope that people didn't read them and just try and go on with my life and sweep it under the rug. Or I thought the most insane thing I can do is get up on stages every night and start talking about my crimes and my time in prison and my life after it, and just own the fuck out of it. I thought that seems like the most insane thing I could possibly do. And for some reason, I felt that meant it would work. It was like, this is the most insane, terrifying, stupid idea you've got. It's going to work. And so, I researched online open mic comedy nights, and the first time I went to one was in Lewisham at the Louis Hotel called Crown Comedy. And I had to bring my mum along because my bail rules were I wasn't allowed out of the house unless I was in the company of my parents. So there's all these like guys in their, early and late 20s putting their name in a bucket, and then this dude just rocks up with his mum, sits down, puts his name in the bucket. But then I also had to ask if I could go on early because I had to get home for my curfew. So guys are like, well, who the fuck's this guy? And then I said out loud 5 minutes worth of jokes about getting arrested and going to prison that I'd memorized. And I didn't really perform them. I just I just was like a script that I'd memorized. I just kind of said them and I was so fucking nervous, but I started to get laughs. And I just remember the first time you start to get laughs on stage, it just felt so good. Like, okay, I'm not an idiot. Like, there is something funny here. And then I got off stage and there were so many people that came up to me and said such nice words. And I just thought, wow, I could be onto something here. This feels like a really positive beginning. And so luckily soon after my bail rules relaxed, so I was allowed to leave the house without my parents, but I had to be home by 10 p.m. And so I just started going to open mic comedy nights pretty much every night, but I'd always have to go on early because I had to race home. And as I got closer to sentencing, the cops started to check at my house like a lot, like every second or third day, because I think they were trying to catch me out. But it felt crazy. The first time I performed in front of a real audience was in Newtown in front of about 70 people, and I did so well and I got so many laughs that afterwards I was buzzing. And it was quite dangerous for me because it felt like the same buzzing that I used to get from cocaine from performing. And I noticed in me that like there was something which wanted me to like, keep chasing that buzz for the night. But luckily I had a curfew and I had to race home because otherwise I probably would have been in a position where I was trying to chase drugs around town. But once I knew that was a dangerous feeling, I talked about that in alcohol and drug counselling, and now I'm aware of that feeling. But it was that first time was quite dangerous. But I guess that just showed me that there is something addictive about like performing and doing well. And so that became my new addiction. And that's what showed me something about addiction is that like, if you've got an addictive personality, it can be very bad. It can be very dangerous, but there's also the potential for you to use it in a very positive way for something very constructive if you just find the outlet. And so for me, that was comedy. And so I became totally addicted to performing. I was doing shows 5-6 nights a week. All over Sydney, and just every time I'd get up on stage and I'd slightly improve a joke, or I'd learn something more about performing, or about performing under pressure, or in a big room, at a small room, there was always just something else that you could learn. And so I kept doing that night after night after night until I got sentenced in July 2022, and that my stand-up comedy, believe it or not, became part of the reasoning why I didn't go back to prison, because we were able to say, hey, I've got a full-time job. I'm doing stand-up comedy most nights, which has been a huge part of my rehabilitation. I was doing alcohol and drug counselling, that I was doing clean piss tests to show that I wasn't doing drugs anymore. That all these things combined with the fact that I'd also done 4 months in prison during COVID, and I had done quasi-custody under house arrest. We had this narrative that we packaged together, which said to the judge, well, hey, what benefit to society is there of sending this guy back to jail? And I was sitting in court thinking I was going to go back. I was wearing 3 pairs of underwear, thinking, well, this has been a nice little time, but I'm going back. And I was okay with that. Like, it didn't faze me. But, I was lucky enough to get a judge that felt like there wasn't any benefits to society in sending me back. I know that I got one of the best judges I could have out of many. There's plenty of them that would have sent me away for years. So as good of an argument as we made, a lot of it still comes down to luck of the draw when it comes to a judge. As you hear from any guy in jail, there's no truth in sentencing. And so that was it. July 2022, I got sentenced to an intensive corrections order and 200 hours community service. And I've been doing stand-up comedy most nights ever since. And I'm a broke comedian living with my parents, and I'm happier now than I've ever been in my life. And I finally feel like I am living a life with purpose in a way that I never felt before. And that's cool. You don't realise, you think money and drugs and street cred and all these things like are cool. They mean nothing at the end of the day. They're all hollow, and none of that will fill you in any meaningful or lasting way. Plenty of guys that are going through massive withdrawals they're hanging out from like heroin. But no, I found once I had a few days of sleeping off the coke, I was fine. I was relatively fine, and I found that once I'd had that 4 months in prison, that severed that mental connection for me. I think it's not only addiction but also habit that you get into with your mind. And so I thought that I was going to get out and that if I had a few beers, I'd want to do cocaine again. Never. I don't. I can have 6, 10 beers. I don't think about drugs. Touch wood. That's the way it's been so far. Same with gambling. I think it just, I don't know if it's a combination between the 4 months that I did locked up that severed that part in my brain, but also just that all of this stuff that's happened to me has just changed the person that I am, the person I want to be, and what I value, because I love so much the life I get to live now, and I don't really want to do anything to jeopardize that. If I never got caught, I probably would have died in my early 40s as a fat, rich cokehead, right? My heart would have stopped. And I mean, look, if it wasn't for the fact that my ex-fiance had a mental breakdown, told the cops and got the house raided, I don't think I probably would have ever got caught. It happened the way that it needed to happen. And I am so grateful because it's essentially saved my life. I live such a happy, positive life now and get to do things that I dreamed of as a kid because it all went to shit. And so, I mean, look, if I was talking to someone who is involved in crime right now, there's nothing I can say that's going to get them to stop doing it, right? Because they'll be the same as me, thinking that they're never going to get caught. But all I can say is when shit falls apart, and sooner or later it will, I hope that you have a similar experience than I did, which is for you to suffer and for it to feel like shit and for you to not like that feeling, and to use that shit feeling as a catalyst to change your life. To say, I don't need to be doing crime to have a happy life. In fact, I'll probably be a lot happier without it. And the truth is, there's so many guys in jail that could be successful at whatever they do if they just applied the same mindset they used to crimes to something that was legal. I think also, if you go to prison and get out and you've had the support of family and friends through that time, and that doesn't make you want to change your life and stop doing crime, then I can't help you, because that was what did it for me. I was always prepared, you do the crime, you do the time, and I was willing to cop that. And I was willing to cop a lot more years than the measly 4 months I did. But what I didn't realise was how selfish I'd been, because when you do time, you don't do it alone. People that love you do it with you. And in my case, I think people that love you probably do it harder than you do. So I think if you have loved ones that love you and you keep doing it and going to jail, then you've got to question how much you love those people. If you get out and you have no support network and no one that loves you and you keep doing crime, then I don't blame you, because I would probably be the same. I would probably keep doing it if I had no reason to stop, because I don't think prison as a punishment itself is enough of a disincentive to crime. But it should be if you have a support network of people that give a shit about you. That was the difference for me. And I know how privileged I am, not only with my upbringing that I squandered, but also with how lucky I was. I mean, I was offered a job about a week after I got out of prison. I had family, I had a home to go to. I had family and friends that loved me, that stuck by me. A lot of guys don't have that, and I'm not trying to dismiss that. I know how lucky I was to have that, and that's been a huge difference in me being able to change my life. So if guys don't have that, then I get it. If they don't have that, I get it. I can understand why they continue to fall apart, and that's why I think society needs to be less judgmental of people and try and support them more. But if they're guys that do have the support network, then like think about the impact that you've had on those loved ones and change, do better, because that was the single thing that has changed me, was the love of my friends and family. I mean, obviously, look, there's some of your best mates. I mean, my fiance dropped me within 3 weeks of me being in prison. She had a new bloke 2 weeks later, right? When I got out, she's first one contacted me to try and get back together. Some of my best mates, guys that like constantly were telling me I love you, brother, that guys that owed me money, were the first guys when I got out that I contacted because I thought they'd give a shit, never came to see me, never, when I was under house arrest. But it's not all doom and gloom. I think on the flip side, people let you down, but also people that you never expected to be there for you will surprise you. That's what I've learned, is that prison is a great clarifier. It just clarifies the things that you should value, not only for life, but also friendships, relationships. That's what it did for me, show me who my real friends were. And now I owe it to them to try and be the best version of myself and a success to repay that debt. And I'm not going to repay that debt through drug money and crime. I'm going to do that by being a good person, a man of my word, a man of substance, a success story in a legal way. That's what I'm driven to do now. There's nothing I love more in the world than going to rooms with strangers most nights of the week and making them laugh. And I mean, one of my jokes have been about, I thought when I started doing jokes about getting arrested and going to prison, I thought I was going to get booed off stage, people were going to hate it. But what I've found is people, so many people have been fascinated by the story, and also they love that I'm self-deprecating. I'm taking the piss out of myself with most of it. And I think that a lot of people out there are struggling and they just need a laugh, right? That's what I've learned, is that so many people are doing a hard time, and a laugh can save a life. Because one of the reasons why I got into comedy was because when something funny happened in prison, it just seemed so out of place, because you're around by prison screws and everyone's in green and there's cameras and barbed wire fences. And when a very funny joke happens, when something hilarious happens and you're pissing yourself laughing, you think, fuck, this is not the place for that, right? But also it's quite powerful, because I'd forget about where I was. I'd forget about the cameras and the guards and the barbed wire fences, and I'd be free just for a few seconds. And that's when I was like, wow, laughter is so powerful. If it can make me feel free in this place for a few seconds, that's something that I think is worthy of me dedicating my life to. Because, as I say on stage, look, laughter's not going to solve all your problems for you, but it might just help you to remember that life's not all doom and gloom, that there are positives to it, and help give you the strength to keep on going. I am happy to dedicate the rest of my life to just going up in rooms with strangers and making them laugh, because that's what makes my soul happy. And it's finally given me purpose that I've never felt before. So we'll keep riding this wave and see where it goes. But it's been going pretty well so far. I've been doing it for 18 months, and I think we're just getting started. So it's exciting to see what will happen.